One second. Yeah, I think you guys have a great project. It's very interesting. Or so, are you both musicians? Can I ask?
I play trumpet. She's in chorus.
Okay.
Yes. So to start it off, can you tell us a little bit about your occupation or what it has to do with musical effects on the human brain?
Well, let me start off by saying my name is Al Bumanis. I'm Director of Communications for the American Music Therapy Association, and I'm a music therapist, a board-certified music therapist. I have the letters in capitals MT-BC behind my name, which means I've gone through the training and the continuing education and the certification to be a professional music therapist. I'll get to your question in a second. Let me give you a little background about what music therapy is, the occupation, and I think it'll make more sense. Music therapy is a health profession that uses music as a treatment tool to address non-musical goals. Let me go back a bit. It's a health profession. Music is powerful, and I think throughout history, music has always been used in health-related areas, but also social areas. By that I mean weddings, parties, long ago harvest celebrations. You could say that music's always been a part of culture. So that's very important to think about music in the bigger picture. That is, it is important to cultures all over the world. Now, adolescence, I think that's probably historically a new addition to culture. Before, when kids were in the adolescent stage, they began working. It was almost like there was no adolescence. And they were out on the fields or working in the factories. It's only fairly recently that adolescence has come into play. And in that sense, music, the cultural part of it, music specifically for adolescents, is really sort of a new phenomenon. Now, your question was about, okay, so we're a health profession, and I said music is a powerful tool. Music does have effects on the brain. I think it was the 1990s where people decided it was the decade of the brain, and a lot of research was being done. Specifically brain mapping, using MRI techniques, using other scientific methods to study music's effect, but also other effects of how the environment affects the brain. I think it's pretty safe to say it's still a mystery. At least to me. I am not a neuroscientist. I'm a music therapist. And in that sense, I work with persons with disabilities and illnesses from all ages. And we're talking about kids, pediatric patients, preemies in the neo-intensive, what is that called?
Neonatal intensive care unit.
Neonatal intensive care units. Kids who are born so early. And we have music therapists have done some great work in helping them. I guess the basic concept is nutritive sucking. When music is played for kids, they seem to thrive more. And it goes all the way, again, on the continuum of aging to hospice and palliative care, where music therapy can be used for persons who are in the final stages of life, and how life review and maybe relaxation techniques and just reinforcing the anxiety of the last phase of life. I'll give you a little history of music therapy. At least modern music therapy goes to before and during World War II, where the profession really started. It's always been, or music has always been part of health, whether in different cultures, throughout the ages, and even prehistoric times. But modern music therapy traces its roots to World War II, where soldiers and veterans, at that time it was called shell shock. Nowadays the term is post-traumatic stress disorder, and it's still a big issue with music therapists working today. So we trace our roots to working in mental health and using the techniques, whether it's relaxation, whether it's providing an environment that is non-invasive, that makes it easier to discuss issues, whether it's songwriting to talk about issues. It's not as confrontational as other therapies. So that, in brief, is a history of music therapy, like that.
So, what is your opinion on the youth being affected by music and its lyrics?
Music and its lyrics definitely has an effect on our youth. Again, when I'm talking as a music therapist, I'm talking about youth who are at risk. We work with clients who have faced trauma, who have a diagnosed either a mental or physical disability, who come from backgrounds that are just not conducive to thriving. Every generation, music's important too. I don't think inherently music is a bad thing. You can say that there's a health profession that is based on the power of music. As I discussed, music's a part of everyday life, and that's individualized for people, and that cuts across cultural and age groups. All people like music. They all like different music. But if a person is suffering from a diagnosed mental illness or so, even as a child, you have to be very careful of what music is utilized, and you have to be careful about how you approach that client in a treatment situation. That is not to say, if a client brings up, let's say, hip-hop or rap, that might be controversial. Now it's almost mainstream music. But you can make the case that back in the 50s when Elvis Presley, when other musicians were out. Again, it was this sense of rebellion against their parents and just the shock value of it. And a lot of times kids will use music to shock their parents, you know, as a form of rebellion. And that's okay. I mean, that I think is very typical. But in a clinical setting, you have to be very careful about how you use music. I would say that we as music therapists sort of take apart the material and structure of various types of music. Let's take rap. We have lyrics, and then we have the beat, and maybe more stuff. I think it's interesting, if you took one away from the other, you sort of left with not much there. You know, I think they're intertwined. But it provides a therapist with a platform, if you will, to work with adolescents to see what their issues are. And it comes down to boundaries, which is more or less the social norms. I think kids are always trying to push boundaries. And again, that's a natural part of childhood. But when it comes to kids who are maybe in trouble with the law, maybe in trouble, I shouldn't say trouble, but kids, again, who have a mental illness or some sort of neurological disability, they too are looking for shock value. You can use those tools of the beat and of the flow in therapeutic songwriting, you know, to get to the issues of, okay, so what is bothering this one individual? You know, one kid who has problems getting along with other kids or is violent, things like that. And music, again, is a tool that may be able to reach them when other tools can't.
Adding on to that, what are your thoughts on children ages 5 to 10 listening to rappers and then repeating the words?
Kids at a very early age, I don't think they understand what they're really listening to. And I'm speaking as a grandparent now. I have grandkids 6, 4, and 2 years of age, and they do repeat the music they hear. But whether their understanding of it is realistic, I don't think they do. I think a lot of rap music culturally, again, goes back to even history of the United States. We're looking at a population, a group of people who were enslaved, and the music that came out of that, the spirituals. And from there going into blues, which I think is a foundational music, which explained the pain of living under certain circumstances. I think those forms of music for everybody are healthy expressions. I think 5-year-olds wouldn't understand the background of it, you know, and just repeating the words is not necessarily really relevant, you know. Acting on them or trying to pervert them in some way would raise a red flag.
A common teenager listens to music. Can you tell us how music can affect and can have an effect on the mind?
I'm not a neuroscientist, but I think you can say that music affects the mind probably more than anything else. But the mind can be defined as emotional, also as the social aspects of it. There's even research about physiological effects, about either lowering blood pressure, getting a relaxation response, or increasing blood pressure, increasing adrenaline. This is not music therapy, but it shows maybe the effects. When armies march into war, they play music that sort of brings them into that position where they're ready to fight. And again, look at history, patriotic music throughout, and marching into war with fife and drums and other kind of music. So music's always played that role. Again, the neuroscience thing is probably beyond me as a music therapist. There are plenty of studies being done now on neuroscience and the exact areas of the brain that are affected by listening to music.
What genre of music can have the most negative effect on the teenage mind?
I think that the answer to that is so individualized. I think back to my earlier years, teenage years, and the genre of music that I liked was rock and roll. I grew up with the Beatles. They came over in 1964, and it was like a revolution, you know. Basically, in a sense, they stole from the earlier blues tradition in the United States, the jazz tradition, the African American culture, and all that. What affected me most was music that I didn't like, which might have been at that time Perry Como, though I've grown to like him more over the years. And Tony Bennett, who I actually saw at a concert with Courtney Love, and it was crazy how I enjoyed Tony Bennett after maybe the chaos that I felt about Courtney Love. But I think the point is that it's specific to the individual. I'm not going to say that hip-hop music is detrimental to people. I think songs like Cop Killer and all that, in where I worked as a music therapist in a forensic setting where persons were incarcerated with a mental illness, that kind of music would be contraindicated. I mean, if they were playing that, that would be something that we would need to work on, and something that could be seen as threatening and not moving in the right direction of healthy listening to music.
Due to recent activity, how can hearing about a celebrity doing drugs have an effect on the mind of a teenager, even if they don't notice the difference?
A celebrity doing drugs, celebrities have more impact. They're role models, and they do have impacts on kids. But I generally, and this might be more of talking as a parent and a grandparent as a therapist, but I trust most teenagers. Teenagers come out fine. There's a few who might become obsessive over a celebrity, I don't know, acting like Justin Bieber or I don't know, Whitney Houston had a very difficult issue. Of course, it's going to affect some people, but I think overall, kids are okay. It's when they're not that they probably come into the therapeutic realm where therapists like myself would be addressing those issues.
I know you mentioned this before, but can music help people who have mental illnesses? For example, could a person with post-traumatic stress disorder use music to help them?
Music therapy, again, traces its roots to mental health. And we still, I think, are looking at our workforce. Most of our people still work in mental health settings. So we work with persons with schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and especially PTSD. We have a program right here at the Walter Reed, which is specifically designed to help persons with PTSD work through their issues. And how did they do that? Well, using techniques like songwriting, bringing out the pain, talking about it. And what makes music therapy unique is that it's non-evasive. Again, I think in the military culture, a lot of times they say, hey, get over it. But music therapy can be viewed as safe. You're writing a song, or you're talking about somebody else's song, or you're singing a song, and it brings up emotions. Not that it covers it up. It could be just as effective. And music therapists work within the realm of a treatment team. So all this information that comes out during the session is shared with the psychiatrist, the psychologist, and others. And music therapists can work on relaxation techniques to help a person sleep better, reduce anxiety by learning maybe simple meditation techniques and breathing techniques. But most of it is letting out those issues that come in, that can come and haunt people. And it's done in a very, how shall we say, coming through the back door maybe. And I think therapeutic songwriting, singing with a therapist, and where, again, the product is not important, it's the process of going through writing a song, thinking about it, in a safe environment that is most helpful to the client.
The teenager years are said to be the hardest and the most important thing they stress in school is to avoid peer pressure. How can some of the music today add to the pressure put on teens to do drugs or have sex?
I was going to say, repeat the question. That's let me just take a little bit.
Absolutely.
I think the pressure to do drugs, to have sex, has always been there for the modern teenager. And again, I have faith in teenagers to make the right decision. It's when it becomes overblown. By that I mean if the media, the record companies, the performers do have a responsibility to kids. And that responsibility goes beyond selling their product. I've talked to hip hop artists who have said, if I confronted them, that they've added sexual innuendo and other things to their songs just to sell their product. And it goes to the rebellion issue and all that. Again, the clients that I would work with, the kids that I would work with, I'd be much more sensitive to what they're listening to, and they're probably more susceptible to negative connotations. But I have faith in the new generation that they know the difference. They know what they're being sold, you know. Sex sells, drug sells, but they also know the consequences, I think, from HIV to what's happening now with heroin addiction and things like that.
You learned the alphabet song when you were at a really young age. How can music or putting a tune to something help you memorize it?
Well, I think you define music therapy by that. When, let me start again, because you don't want me to repeat exactly what you said. Or learning the alphabet song is a good, simple example of music therapy in an educational setting. Again, we work with clients who have maybe cognitive disabilities or are not able to learn like other people learn. But when you sing the alphabet song to them, they pick it up quickly. You know, we can transfer that to a recent case of traumatic brain injury. Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords suffered a severe brain injury when she was shot 4 years ago. And music therapy played a role in her recovery. For her to relearn speech, one of the most effective treatments was music therapy, where she sang with the therapist. And she relearned words, maybe a few at a time. I think the underlying scientific principle is neuroplasticity, that the brain has the ability to rewire itself after trauma. And music helps to create new neural pathways. And that, I think, is at the heart of music therapy. Now we're talking sort of neurological rehabilitation, and with the alphabet song we're talking about learning disabilities, maybe how music therapy can be used. If your question is, does music have an effect on the brain? Well, yeah, I think those two things prove that. But the psychological impact is probably harder to gauge. And, but it does have that too, on emotions and stress levels, hormonal levels, perception of pain, all those things. So it is definitely connected.
Music helped Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence. When he could not figure out the right wording for a certain part, He would play his violin to help him. The music helped him get the words from his brain onto the paper. How can music help teenagers with their schoolwork?
Well, Thomas Jefferson playing the violin, I think, used that as a relaxation device, as a way to take his mind away from what he was doing. And there have been studies about basically music makes you smarter and the Mozart effect. Now, I don't know if they have enough scientific rigor to be true, but I think you could look back over the years that those kids who do take music in school score higher on tests or have higher IQs, and whether that helps in developing the brain and making it more active and thus more aware. I think there is some preliminary evidence that that is the case. That also comes into effect with older people when they play a musical instrument. If you looked at an MRI, it lights up certain areas of the brain. So I think Thomas Jefferson was using that to help him, just get his brain in the best possible condition, sort of like an athlete getting ready to go out there and pitch a few more innings. So students, they could learn from that. I think music is a healthy activity. It helps with creating and developing your cognitive ability and resources. So playing an instrument, I think, is very important for all students.
I know that when I'm working, I like to listen to music. Can listening to music while doing homework or chores affect the performance of that activity?
In my opinion, I've seen it both ways. Personally, just because of my training in something, it's very difficult for me to work with music because it takes precedent over everything else I'm doing. I would stop whatever I'm working on and just listen to the music because that's sort of my job. So at work, I really don't listen to music unless I have to listen to something that relates directly to music therapy. But I've seen other people listen to music, people work. I know that a lot of the research foundation of music therapy is used by companies that provide music for offices and other things to increase productivity. They look at tempo, they look at the materials and structure of music, thinking to optimize the productivity of either their workers or students. I'm not an expert on that. I would say, I shy away from that, but that is a question that I might let my colleague try to answer. Do you have opinion? Yeah. I mean, well, you probably need to do this.
Good.
Yeah, you can switch the mics.
Yeah. Are you done with me? Did I give you enough?
Go ahead.
Well, Aryana, should we add in the extra questions? No?
We can do it later, but
Okay. So...
Switch.
Yeah, next.
You guys have good questions. You guys have...
You wrote the questions?
She wrote most of them.
They're very good.
Here. And you might need to sit here.
Am I good?
Yeah.
I just wanted to say that my opinion about listening to music to work is that well, I think Al said this is totally individual. For some people, music helps them concentrate while they're working, and for some people, it totally distracts them. So it depends more on the activity and the person than the music or what you're doing. For example, I am painting my house right now. I can't do it without music, because when music is on, it feels like it goes faster, and I don't notice the time going by, and it doesn't feel like it's such a tedious, horrible job. So I put music on then, but when I'm really trying to concentrate, like Al just said, music distracts me from what I'm thinking about. So if I want to use music when I'm really trying to concentrate, I think what I would more often do is take a break and play some music and then come back to it. And because when I've taken a break and I've allowed my brain to sort of take a rest and be active in the way that music allows my brain to be active, and then when I come back to the work that I want to do, it's more ready. It's like Al said, an athlete who stretches before the big game. My brain is now stretched and ready to think. And so I might not listen to music while I'm studying or while I'm trying to write something, but I might listen to it in preparation for that, because that would be helpful for me to be ready to have all of my neurons firing and all of those little action potentials and the electrical impulses moving quickly through my brain. And like Al, I think Al sort of alluded to the idea that when we're thinking, if you look at brain activity in a brain scan, you'll see a part of the brain light up. So if I'm talking, one part of my brain lights up. If I'm thinking about music, a different part of my brain lights up. If I'm running, a different part of my brain lights up. If I'm trying to balance, a whole other part of my brain lights up. But when someone's involved in music, more of the brain lights up than any other single activity. So the language center and the balance center and the spatial recognition center, they're all working together. And we believe that's why music therapy is very effective, because more of your brain is being involved when you're in a musical activity than any other single activity. So absolutely, I think music can help you when you're working, but you have to be aware of its effect on you personally, and you have to find the right kind of music too. Because not every music is going to be relaxing to me. Not every music is going to be energizing to me, and I have to figure out how it affects me, because how it affects me is totally different than how it might affect you or Al or you. And so that's when you're talking about somebody who has needs that are severe enough to need therapy, then that's what the music therapist helps you find, is what that right music is and how to use that right music. But you can do that as a proper person in real life, and just figure out, like, I want to relax right now, so maybe playing hip hop is not the thing that I want to play if I want to relax. Or if I want to get energized to go to a party on Friday night, probably classical music isn't going to get me there, because it's going to make me more sedate, and it's going to lower my blood pressure and my heart rate and my respiration, as opposed to bring it up and get me ready to be excited. So it's very, very individual. I think that's the thing that we keep saying over and over again, is that the way that music affects each individual person and the kind of music that affects them is so different. And that's the trick in music therapy, is having someone trained enough in enough kinds of music and how people respond to it generally, to pick the right music for the right activity and for the right intervention. Does that make sense?
Yes. Al, you can come back and sit next.
Come on, Al. We can just pass the mic, too.
Yeah. So, what are the final thoughts on this topic? What are your final thoughts on this topic?
Well, in conclusion, I think music is a powerful tool. It is individualized. It is cuts across cultures, age groups. It's, part of who we are. I think every culture in the world has some form of music. So it is a very important part of our lives. We look at it as music therapists, the positive aspects of it, looking at how it is a healing tool, how it helps with, again, illnesses and disabilities, you know. And then on the other hand, it could be used for other things that maybe aren't so positive. Marching into war is a simple example. Or I know it's been used when Manuel Noriega, who was the dictator in Panama a few decades ago, he was cornered in a church, and the Army Psychological Unit played heavy metal music to get him to surrender. So that's sort of a negative use of music therapy. We work under a pretty strict code of ethics and standards of clinical practice, and don't do things like that. But the bottom line is that music is a powerful element in our lives.
What are your thoughts?
I agree. I think we know from lots and lots of research that music affects us. It affects everyone. There's never been a culture discovered that didn't have a form of music in the history of all the cultures that we know about. Every single one had some form of music, and to me that speaks to the idea that music is a basic human response to life, that we all need to express ourselves through music. So my final thought is that music is a very powerful tool, and we need to be careful about how we use it. We need to use it wisely, but that there is no one kind of music that's good, and there's no one kind of music that's bad. We have to really observe the effects that it has on us, and then choose music that are going to have positive effects as much as possible. And then when that music has negative effects, pay attention to what those are, and know how to mitigate those effects, because I don't want to go too far down the negative road and become so anxious because of the music that I'm playing. But I might want to feel those feelings for a little while, and it might be good to feel music, or hear music that makes me feel anxious. I just don't want to do it all the time when it might be a detrimental effect to me studying for the next test that I have, or preparing the next big presentation at work or something like that. So it's a powerful tool. It should be used wisely, but it's very effective, and it affects everyone. We all respond to it. So.
Thank you. Extra questions or no? Yeah. Okay. So we had some other questions as backup, just in case we had extra time, and we had plenty of time.
Okay.
So, how long have you been working in this field of work, and what types of things have you encountered?
Do you want to start?
Oh, you can start.
I've been a music therapist since a little over 20 years. So my background is mostly working in psychological areas. So and personally, I worked in a lot of prisons. So I worked in an adult prison, and I worked in a mental hospital, and I worked in a few nursing homes with Alzheimer's patients. But the most time I spent clinically was working with adolescents in prison. So anybody from 11 years old to 19 or 20 years old who'd been arrested. And what we did mostly in those sessions was help these kids who have made some wrong choices to learn how to better cope, right? They might have, well, they obviously have feelings about what has happened to them in their lives, and being arrested and being in a juvenile detention facility. And so we helped them cope with those feelings so that they didn't come out in detrimental ways. And then we talked about ways that when they do go home, because they all will go home eventually, almost unless you're working with a very limited population, all prisoners are eventually going to get out of prison. So what are you going to do when you get out that's going to be different? How are we going to change some of the responses to life situations that won't get you arrested again? And so we use music to talk about those things, and we listen to rap and hip hop all the time because for me and for where I was working, that was the kind of music that the kids there liked. But then we talked about, like you asked some questions about negative lyrics and negative experiences communicated through music. We definitely took that opportunity to use the music to talk about those things and why they're good choices or why they're not good choices, and how can we make better choices. And that's where I think Al talked a little bit about songwriting and writing different lyrics and talking about when those kinds of songs would be appropriate to listen to, or what a better choice of music would be if that song led you to think something that got you into trouble. That's mostly what I've done in my life, but I've also worked with elderly people. I've also worked in school settings, helping people with learning disabilities, helping them use music to learn the material better, because I think I said before, all of that area of the brain that's working when you're using music, it helps you remember better too. So it might be a good way to study for a test or to remember information that is difficult to continue remembering. You want to talk about? Al has a little different population experience than me. Go ahead.
Well, most of my experience is in adult psychiatric, specifically forensic psychiatric, which I guess the popular term is the criminally insane. It's those persons who are sent to a mental hospital after committing pretty heinous crimes. So it was a good experience in the sense that you really got to see mental illness, the real aspects of it. Most of the work was based on things to develop insight, because I would say most of our patients, clients, were in denial that they had a mental illness. They were maybe that percentage of people who either didn't take their medication or the medication didn't have any effect on them. So the whole goal was to look at ways that they could accept their mental illness and how they could move on. It's a very difficult process. Musically, it was very interesting. This actually was before rap really became that popular. You know, it was just coming out. And I always worked from the angle of blues as a basis of therapeutic intervention. But clients do respond to music. Most respond favorably. There's some that it doesn't work with. But again, it's a powerful tool. And you're part of a treatment team. What you do is transferred over to, again, the psychiatrist, psychologist, the nursing staff. Everybody else works together to help the person. And my experience has been that music is a very powerful tool.
Okay, so due to everything that's happened, why do you think society has become the way it is?
Whoa.
That's a big question.
Sorry. Why do you think society has become the way it is?
What do you mean by the way
musically,
it is?
or
musically.
Oh, okay.
Well, I think society now, I think popular music idioms, some of them are an expression of what is going on in society, whether that's racial tension, economic inequality, all those things. I think there are honest expressions of what people in the United States are going through. But I also think that there are some people out there who just want to sell records and want to be controversial and things along that nature. Money talks.
And that's been going on for a very long time, too. It's not a new phenomenon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, no, I was just going to add that, is that I think for 60 or 70 or 80 years, the music has been the way groups express themselves, but also rebel, but also make money. So you have to be a little bit careful about what the motivations are and try to discern your own thoughts about what people's motivations are when they say something through music, because they might be trying to change the world for the better, and they might be just trying to take your dollar, and you have to decide what that means to you, if that's something you want to support or you don't. And I think we all make those choices every day when we buy music or we choose music to listen to.
Before you started this field of work, were you ever aware of how much music has affected the teenage mind?
Oh, absolutely. This is why I started this field of work. I've always been a musician my whole life. I played the piano when I was 3 years old, and I started playing the violin at 8 years old, and I've always loved it. But at some point, I started to realize that music meant more to me than almost anything else, and I started to think about why that was, even before I knew what music therapy was. I thought a lot about how music affected me as a teenager and why I used music and when I used music, and how it affected my friends around me. And that's probably more than anything else what led me to become a music therapist, is I wanted to know more about that, and I wanted to use it in the most positive ways possible. You have any thoughts?
It was probably the most important part of my teenage years, playing music in bands, looking up to other guitarists. I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area, or at least high school-wise. So Washington actually has a rich tradition of different kinds of music, but the kind of music I liked, for example, Bruce Springsteen's guitarist, Nils Lofgren, went to the same high school I did. There were brilliant guitarists, Roy Buchanan and Danny Gatton, who were just virtuosos that not too many other people heard about. But music, guitar playing, yeah, that was it for me. But it was also, I played enough clubs and things, and that was rewarding. But it was also rewarding to see the positive effect you could have on people, that music can be used in a different way, and maybe less ego, but more helping. Music therapy is a helping profession, and when that combines, it's a powerful tool. Almost becomes a calling, I would say.
Can you name one song that you've heard promoting bad behavior or violence in the past month?
Can you limit it to one?
You can do more than one.
You want a title? I'm not sure I could name one.
Yeah, it's hard.
One.
Okay, again, we both worked working in forensic hospital and prison settings. I don't think Cop Killer would necessarily go over well with our clients.
Right. Which is an old song.
Yeah, I know.
I was a teenager.
Right. It's hard to say.
Cop Killer? Snoop Dogg. Snoop Dogg did that song. Yeah.
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 Songs along those in that genre, maybe.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times, and I know this happens to me, so I don't know if I can speak for everybody, but I'll listen to a song that sounds incredibly negative to begin with. And then when I start thinking about the songwriter and what they were experiencing and what they're trying to express, I sort of see it in a different way. And I'll give you just I have a young child at home, and she was singing that Take Me to Church song by Hoosier. And it sounds at the beginning like it's a very negative song about religion. And I think that when I started listening more to the lyrics and when I started understanding who Hozier was and where he came from and his experiences, I sort of see it in a different way now. It's more his experience and some things that have happened to him, and he is saying how this made him feel, right? So, and I think a lot of songs are like that. You can hear them and you can say this is a very negative song, but it's the onus is on me to decide how that song affects me and how I think about that song. So that's the one that springs to mind because I was talking to my 7-year-old about that song because she wanted to know what it meant.
Okay, continue.
Okay, so I'll just go back and say that I think because music affects us each so individually, your experience and your perception of what that negative sounding song might be is more important than the negativity that was put into it by the artist. And so that's the important thing. And so some songs are negative, yes, but they can be seen both ways, and you have to decide how you choose to see that and what that means for you in your life.
What makes it possible for kids to get a song stuck in their heads?
Oh.
What do they call it? Brain freeze?
No, earworms.
Earworms.
An earworm, right? When you get a song and you can't get it out of your head. I think that's all about the physiology of the brain. And because all of our brains are slightly different songs stick in different people's heads in different ways. And it might be an experience that you've had that leads that song to ring true for you. It might just be a catchy tune. You might like the rhythm. I remember there used to be a show a very long time ago called American Bandstand. And they used to talk about the new music, and everybody would always say, it's got a great beat. And that was all they said about it. But the beat has something to do with whether or not you remember it. The melody does, the lyrics, your experience, your memories when you first heard that song. When you hear it again, you're going to be more likely to feel those feelings that you were feeling when you first heard it. So all of those things go together, and because, again, we're all different, it affects us completely, each individually in a different way. So, you have anything to add about that?
I know that songwriters are craftspeople. The real good ones. And I think of people, again, locally, Mary Chapin Carpenter is a local songwriter. And one of their things is to write a good hook. And if they could write a hook that becomes a brainworm, is that the?
Earworm.
Earworm, yeah. I think they've done their job. But I don't know if it's been studied enough why that happens. But I think it does happen to everybody, and uniquely good and bad music, or music that you don't like as much as music that you like. I think it's really bad when it's music that you don't like.
Alright, for the final question, question. How can music change the thoughts of a child?
Music can change the thoughts of a child. I think it goes back to the artistic nature of music or any art that has been produced by an artist for people to look at in different ways, for people to think about. If you define child as, again, adolescence, I think that is a stage in life where kids really start thinking, and songs from people like Bob Dylan and all start to maybe take on some meaning for adolescents. Anything that's thought-provoking, I think, is good art.
I think that's a big question because you could talk about how music can help us remember things. You can talk about how music can help us feel our feelings and express ourselves. You can talk about how music exposes us to other people and their culture and their thoughts and their feelings. One of the things that I worked a lot on when I worked at the Juvenile Detention Center was okay, so we're sort of this small group and we maybe don't like that group over there, but let's listen to their music a little bit and see what their music says. And then maybe by understanding their music, we can understand them a little better. So I think that you can open people up to other experiences and other cultures and other people's life experiences by paying attention to their music and trying to understand what they're trying to say. So in that way, you can change your thoughts about another group of people or another nationality or another country. And it's sort of a non-threatening way to learn about them at first. Like, I don't have to say that I'm okay with them, but I can be okay with their music first, and then maybe I can be okay with them after that. So that's a positive way that it can change our thoughts. And I don't think it's just children that are affected in that way. I think everybody, all ages, all nationalities, all genders, we all are affected by music like that. I think that a lot of times we sort of take teenagers and we say, they're all affected this way, but I'm affected this way too. So the trick is to figure out the effect that music has on you and try to use it to have a better effect as opposed to a negative effect. So the best possible outcome as opposed to maybe just an okay outcome or not a good outcome at all. Music is an incredibly powerful tool. We all believe that.
All right, that was the last question. Thank you very much
You're
for
welcome.
doing this.